Alejandro Martín was a well-known name in Madrid, synonymous with luxury and success. By the age of 35, he had achieved what many would never dream of in a lifetime: an empire in the field of technology. His office, located in the heart of Madrid, reflected his power and impeccable style, with glass walls that offered a panoramic view of the city, a detail that Alejandro loved because it symbolized for him the conquest of a world that was always at his fingertips. Of wealthy origin, Alejandro grew up surrounded by privilege, and this shaped his worldview. Although his social life was full of glamorous events, he had a void that he ignored. For him, love was always a game in which he won by impressing, keeping short and shallow novels. He did not believe in deep relationships, especially because he never needed them. Its wealth and charm did the job of attracting people who desired the brightness of its status. However, he had little idea that this controlled and superficial world was about to be shaken by someone he would never consider a figure of interest: a new and discreet secretary named Lúcia Alvarez. Lucy was a simple-looking woman, with thick glasses and always conservative clothes. Daughter of a modest family, her life trajectory was completely opposite to that of Alejandro. Discreet and reserved, she always preferred the security of her own silence. Lucy never bothered to stand out for her beauty, mainly because she believed that her value was in her abilities. She was extremely competent, punctual and efficient in everything she did, which quickly caught the attention of Alejandro's sister, Clara Martín, who hired her for a position in the company. Since the first meeting with Alejandro, Lúcia noticed the coldness and disinterest in the eyes of the boss. Alejandro not only ignored her talent, but made it clear, with subtle gestures, that he saw her as someone invisible. Accustomed to stunning desks, he did not hesitate to display an almost imperceptible disdain, an empty look, each time he addressed Lucy. However, she remained unperturbed, for she cared only about performing her work well. Their limited coexistence quickly set the tone of the story. While Alejandro kept his superficial style, Lúcia was his antithesis, representing everything he rejected and needed in his life. She would become, unexpectedly, a transforming force, someone able to challenge the emotional emptiness of Alejandro. This difference of worlds and personalities established the central conflict of the plot. Alejandro, closed in his materialistic universe and unable to see beyond appearances, and Lúcia, whose true brightness was completely invisible to the eyes of the millionaire. This social and personal barrier between the two was a challenge that Alejandro would have to face if he wanted to understand who the woman really was hiding behind the glasses and discreet clothes. As the weeks went by, Lúcia continued to perform her duties with impeccable efficiency, surprising colleagues and impressing Clara, who saw in her a potential that Alejandro still seemed to ignore. Alejandro, in turn, remained locked in his own bubble of superficiality, maintaining the same distance and coldness with respect to Lúcia, without ever considering the possibility of seeing her beyond her unpretentious appearance. For him, Lúcia was just a discreet and uninteresting gear in his work routine. But a series of twists and turns was about to change the way he saw her. It all started one night when Alejandro needed an urgent business proposal to close a $1 million contract. He requested the assistance of Lúcia to review and reorganize a large amount of documents. Without hesitation, Lúcia offered to stay late and help while other employees left the office. During the hours of intense work, Alejandro had a glimpse of Lucia's intelligence and impeccable organization. He was surprised to see her making quick decisions and suggesting innovative solutions to problems that he had not even considered. For the first time, Alejandro felt a spark of respect and admiration for Lúcia, something he never thought he would feel. By the end of the night, he realized that she was much more than her discreet appearance suggested. This experience, however, caused some discomfort in Alejandro, who began to realize how his prejudice had clouded his view of Lúcia. Restless, he began to observe her more closely at work, beginning to notice small gestures and characteristics that he had previously ignored. Shortly after, the company organized a gala party to celebrate the launch of a new product. Although reluctant, Lúcia was encouraged by Clara to attend the event and for the first time in years decided to give up simple clothes and thick glasses, wearing a beautiful dress and allowing herself a touch of makeup. Upon arriving at the party, Lúcia immediately caught everyone's attention, being almost unrecognizable to her colleagues and to Alejandro himself. When Alejandro saw her, he was completely stunned. He barely recognized Lucy and, in the midst of surprise, began to question himself about why he had never perceived her beauty. Clara, realizing the impact of Lúcia on her brother, provoked him, suggesting that he should see beyond appearances to know the real Lúcia. This comment ignited an internal conflict in Alejandro, who was confronted with the superficiality of his own attitudes. After the party, Alejandro approached Lúcia, trying to find out more about her. Initially motivated by curiosity and sudden attraction, they began to have lunch together and talk about things other than work, but the barrier between the two remained. Lúcia, being cautious, was resistant to Alejandro's friendship, fearing that he was only intrigued by his external transformation. The biggest emotional obstacle, however, was Alejandro's own pride and resistance to admitting that his feelings for Lúcia went beyond friendship. The idea of being genuinely interested in someone who did not correspond to his standard of beauty bothered him, and he tried to rationalize his emotions. This internal conflict led Alejandro to act in a contradictory way. Sometimes affectionate, sometimes distant, which left Lúcia confused and insecure. Clara, who was always more intuitive and empathetic than her brother, perceived the gradual change in Alejandro. She tried to encourage him to accept the feelings he was developing for Lucy and overcome his prejudices. As a marketing director and a power figure in the company, Clara had influence over Alejandro and used this proximity to challenge him to question his attitudes. In frank conversations, she reminded her brother that not all values can be measured in appearance or status, something Alejandro needed to hear. Javier, on the other hand, was a colleague of Lucia's who always appreciated her intelligence and kindness. Unlike Alejandro, he saw Lúcia for what she really was and nurtured a genuine admiration for her. Realizing the sudden interest of Alejandro, Javier began to spend more time with Lúcia, encouraging her to value herself and not to be taken by people who judge her superficially. Javier's support helped Lúcia gain more confidence, but also brought an element of jealousy to Alejandro, who did not like seeing them close. When everything seemed to be heading towards a balance between Alejandro's feelings and Lucia's insecurities, the company faced a serious financial crisis. An administrative error caused a significant loss, and Alejandro was pressured to find solutions to save the company's reputation. In a moment of despair, he turned to Lúcia, who suggested a clever and bold contingency plan. Lucia's plan worked and saved the company from an even greater crisis. This achievement strengthened the admiration of Alejandro and made him realize how much it depended on her, not only professionally but emotionally as well. He began to see that Lúcia was the only person who truly understood him and was by his side in the most difficult moments, without hidden interests. This moment of closeness led to an emotional confession between the two. Alejandro, moved by tension and gratitude, revealed to Lúcia that she was important in his life in a way he had never felt. Lucy, however, still hesitated to accept this feeling, fearing that he was only fascinated by her intelligence and appearance, which she had briefly revealed. She needed proof that Alejandro's feelings were real and that he did not see her as just a passing conquest. Determined to protect her heart, Lúcia decided to temporarily distance herself from Alejandro, making it clear that he needed to prove his feelings were true and consistent. This departure deeply shook Alejandro, who was forced to reflect on his superficiality and the kind of person he wanted to be. This distance was a crucial test for Alejandro. He began to question his priorities, reviewing his lifestyle and the attitudes that led him to lose someone so important. Determined to win her back, Alejandro did everything to show that he had changed and that he really loved her, not for her appearance, but for who she was in her essence. Alejandro spent weeks reflecting on the way he had treated Lúcia, and on the barriers he himself had created for the relationship between them. Her distance forced him to face his own failures, and he began to feel a void that he did not know how to fill. At the same time, he was determined to win her back, but he knew that in order to do so, he would need to prove to her, and himself, that he had changed. The turning point came in an unexpected and tragic way. One morning, Alejandro received an urgent call from Clara, informing him that Lúcia had suffered a serious car accident on the way to work. According to Clara, Lúcia was in a hospital in the city, in delicate condition. Alejandro's world collapsed at that moment. He felt helpless, taken by a panic that he had never experienced. For the first time, he had a real sense that he could lose her and with it everything she had brought to his life. Upon arriving at the hospital, Alejandro found that Lúcia was recovering but still unconscious. Sitting by her bed, he held her hand, silently begging for her to wake up. During that time by his side, he began to open up, confessing his own limitations and fears about love. Alejandro understood that his greatest obstacle was always himself, his inability to allow himself to love someone beyond appearances and social conventions. Lucia's situation deeply shook Alejandro, transforming his view of everything he valued. He realized that his fortune and status were irrelevant without someone to share his life with. Lucy's presence in his life had become essential to him, and the fear of losing her opened internal wounds that he had never admitted before. For the first time, Alejandro cried openly, feeling the weight of his actions and the opportunities he might have missed to truly connect with her. This event was a watershed for Alejandro. He spent days next to Lúcia in the hospital, reflecting on the importance she had gained in his life. Every moment, he reaffirmed the promise of being a better person if she recovered. However, along with this new perception, there was the fear that Lúcia, when she woke up, would not believe in her change or worse, would move away permanently. After a few days, Lúcia finally woke up. Although still weak and confused, she noticed the constant presence of Alejandro by her side. Moved, but still suspicious of his intentions, Lucy asked why he was there. Alejandro, with sincerity, exposed the whole process of transformation that was going through. He admitted his initial prejudice and how he was willing to change to regain his trust. For the first time, Lúcia saw vulnerability and honesty in Alejandro, something she always felt he hid behind his facade of self-sufficiency. Despite the sincere words of Alejandro, Lúcia still had doubts. She feared that this change was only temporary, a reaction to the trauma of the accident. Even touched by his concern, she knew that it would take time to trust Alejandro fully. For her, true love would only be revealed in a commitment that was beyond the words and emotions of a moment. Alejandro, determined to show that he was willing to build something solid with Lúcia, decided to make an unexpected proposal. He suggested that after his recovery, the two of them spend some time together, away from Madrid, so they could meet in an environment other than the office. He wanted to show her that his feelings were beyond appearances and that he was willing to devote himself to this relationship. Lúcia, still unsure, hesitated but accepted the proposal, setting clear conditions. She needed to see an Alejandro willing to overcome his own insecurities and limitations so that the relationship could be true. On the journey, far from the luxury and image he projected in Madrid, Alejandro revealed another facet of himself. He started acting more spontaneously and genuinely, showing Lúcia a human and vulnerable side that she did not know. Between long conversations and moments of relaxation, they reconnected on a deeper level. Alejandro told Lúcia about the pressure of maintaining a public image and the emptiness he felt because he could never fully trust anyone. Lucy, in turn, began to realize his sincere effort to become a better person. However, a new challenge has emerged. Alejandro had to face an internal conflict. Realizing how important Lúcia was in his life, he began to fear that his company and his friends would negatively influence the relationship. He knew that he would have to face resistance from the people around him, who would probably question his involvement with someone out of his standard. Determined to prove to Lúcia and himself that he was ready to make the commitment, Alejandro decided that, upon returning to Madrid, he would face everything and everyone to defend the love he felt. Back in town, Alejandro had to deal with the comments and looks of people who judged him for being with Lúcia. Many questioned him, implying that he was making a mistake in investing in a relationship with someone who did not meet the standards of his social circle. Even some close friends tried to demote him, arguing that he was risking his reputation. Lúcia, realizing this environment of judgment, began to think about moving away to spare Alejandro, even if it cost him his own heart. However, seeing the suffering of Lúcia and the sacrifices she was willing to make, Alejandro finally took a decisive action. At an important social event for the company, he appeared next to Lúcia, publicly declaring that he was with her and that he did not care about other people's opinions. This gesture was clear proof to Lúcia that Alejandro was willing to fight his own pride and protect what he felt for her, regardless of conventions and social judgment. This moment not only solidified the relationship between the two, but also ended Alejandro's cycle of superficiality, showing everyone, and himself, that his transformation was genuine. From this event, Alejandro and Lúcia began a new chapter of their lives, with Alejandro finally freeing himself from the expectations that previously shaped his actions. The accident and challenges made him see the value of true love and what really mattered in life. Lúcia, now confident and feeling loved by who she really was, could also leave behind her insecurities, rediscovering her self-esteem and her place in the world alongside Alejandro. After the public statement of Alejandro alongside Lúcia, the relationship of the two faced new challenges. Although he has shown himself willing to face prejudice, the path to a balanced and judgmental life was not easy. The decision to stay by Lucia's side required an emotional strength and a resistance that Alejandro never thought he would need. This new stage brought adversities that tested the couple and forced Alejandro to make choices that would shape his character and deepen him as a person. The first great adversity came from within the company itself. Some of the shareholders and investors, bothered by the exposure of Alejandro's personal life, began to question his leadership. They argued that the association with someone out of the norm could devalue the company's sophisticated image. They pressured Alejandro, hinting that his credibility and the company would be at risk if he insisted on maintaining the relationship. This moment was crucial for Alejandro, who found himself in a dilemma. He could give in to pressure and distance himself from Lúcia, returning to the superficial standard of living that he once maintained, or he could put his love and values ahead of financial interests. Alejandro, reflecting on what he really wanted for his life, made the decision to prioritize his happiness and relationship with Lúcia. He faced the shareholders, saying that their relationship did not interfere with his management capacity and that if they needed him for who he was, they should also accept his personal choice. This decision made Alejandro lose some contracts and face resistance from business colleagues, but also brought an unexpected gain. The realization that he was for the first time living according to his own convictions and not to please others. Although Alejandro had made this choice for Lúcia, he faced constant internal conflicts. The society around him seemed unable to understand his new relationship, and he had to deal with discreet looks and comments that hurt him in ways he had not imagined before. Lúcia, in turn, perceived this pressure and blamed herself in silence, believing that she was perhaps causing problems in Alejandro's life. One night, after a dinner party where Alejandro was ignored by some colleagues due to his choice, he and Lúcia had an honest conversation. Alejandro expressed his frustrations and how the opinion of others still bothered him, even if he tried to be indifferent. Lúcia then questioned whether he was really ready to face them by his side. This was a moment of revelation for Alejandro, who finally understood that total overcoming would not come from challenging others, but from accepting who he was and whom he loved, without any justification. It was then that Alejandro decided to temporarily depart from the high society of Madrid and the traditional millionaire image he had cultivated for years. He and Lúcia spent more time in simple life, in activities away from the spotlight, where Alejandro learned to know himself better and appreciate small happiness. This change not only brought him closer to Lúcia, but also brought inner peace, because he began to discover a side of himself that was not conditioned by the public image. Alejandro's transformation was not just about accepting his love for Lúcia, but about reassessing what he really wanted in life. For the first time, he realized that happiness was not in material achievements or approval of others, but in small things and moments he built with Lúcia. He decided to reduce his work pace and delegate more responsibilities to Clara, giving himself more freedom to build a life alongside Lúcia. Lúcia, in turn, also went through a personal transformation. Seeing Alejandro give up status and sacrifice opportunities made her reflect on what it really meant to be there in his life. With this, Lúcia began to abandon the insecurity that followed her from the beginning of the relationship and believe in her own value. Realized that Alejandro loved her not for convenience or appearance, but for what she represented in his life. This process of self-confidence allowed Lúcia to flourish, revealing a safe, strong woman who finally assumed her identity completely. She changed the modest look for a more authentic version and, with the support of Alejandro and Clara, began working on projects within the company, taking advantage of her intelligence and skills, which were now seen and valued. Over time, Alejandro received a proposal to expand his company into other countries, something that would imply a significant change for him and Lúcia. The opportunity to grow his empire was tempting, but he knew that such a decision would require a return to the old rhythm of life and even greater public exposure. In talking to Lúcia, they both discussed the implications and realized that despite the material achievements, Alejandro's true purpose was no longer just in business but in the simple and honest life they had built together. It was a difficult decision, but Alejandro chose to turn down the offer and keep his company in Madrid, reducing the pressure and pace so he could enjoy what really mattered. This definitive choice was a milestone in the transformation arc of Alejandro. He realized that by giving up social pressure and external expectations, he was finally in control of his life, living according to his own choices and values. Throughout this process, Clara played a key role in Alejandro's journey. She has become a constant point of support, advising you in times of crisis and reminding you of the true value of a relationship based on love and authenticity. Clara was a kind of mirror for Alejandro, reflecting the changes he needed to make and reinforcing that he had support in his quest for a more meaningful life. Clara also helped Lúcia adapt to the new phase of her life alongside Alejandro, advising her on the complexity of living in an influential family and helping her gain more confidence to occupy her space. Clara and Lúcia developed a deep friendship, and Lúcia came to see Clara as a sister, someone she could fully trust. At the end of this process, Alejandro and Lúcia became stronger and more complete versions of themselves. Alejandro was now a man who understood the real meaning of success and happiness, and Lúcia, a woman sure of her value, who had learned to overcome the insecurities of the past. They realized that together they were able to face any adversity, for they had built a true and solid bond. In a last moment of reflection, Alejandro thanked Lúcia for having entered his life and for having, without intention, changed his whole concept of love and happiness. He recognized that the personal growth he experienced would not have been possible without Lucy's support and patience. This love, which began with mistrust and distance, now revealed itself unbreakable, built on the foundations of respect, trust and mutual understanding. This turning point represented, for Alejandro, the beginning of a new life. A path where he could be authentic and happy next to the person he truly loved. After months of personal growth and transformation, Alejandro and Lúcia had built a life together, facing the difficulties with courage and determination. However, a last challenge still hovered over them, testing the strength of love that they have struggled to consolidate. This moment of tension would culminate in the most emotional and revealing scene of their lives, where they would have to make definitive decisions about what really mattered. One day, Alejandro received a new business proposal from one of the largest technology companies in the United States, offering him the chance to expand his company abroad with massive investments. This offer represented the realization of an old dream and the possibility to transform your company into a global giant. However, this would imply a move to New York, where he would need to settle for at least 2 years, moving away from everything he had built alongside Lucy. Alejandro was divided. On the one hand, he was tempted by the challenge, by the growth that he always sought. On the other, he feared that this change would shake the relationship with Lúcia, putting to test everything they lived together. He knew that choice would change their lives forever, but still could not avoid the desire to seize the opportunity. Sharing the news with Lucy, she was surprised and at the same time deeply troubled. Although she supported him, she also understood that the distance and intense pace of the new position could affect the relationship. In a tense conversation, Lúcia expressed her fear that Alejandro would get lost again in ambition, putting work and image above feelings. The mood became heavy, because Alejandro felt pressured to choose between love and a dream of growth that he always wanted. One night, tension reached its limit when Alejandro, after a meeting with investors, discussed the offer with Lúcia. Lúcia, already emotionally worn out, asked Alejandro to think about the impact that this decision would have on both of them. Alejandro, in turn, felt misunderstood, believing that Lúcia was preventing him from realizing a dream. In the heat of the moment, Alejandro uttered a harsh phrase. "Perhaps I need this opportunity more than you think. I can't spend my whole life limited because you're afraid." These words deeply hurt Lucy, who, with tears in her eyes, stood up and left. Alejandro, still dominated by pride, did not stop her from leaving, but seeing her leave, he felt a painful emptiness, something that left him in a state of deep regret. The absence of Lúcia brought to Alejandro a pain that he could not describe. As he spent that night alone, unable to sleep, he began to remember all the moments they shared, reflecting on everything they had built together. For the first time, he understood that his feelings for her went far beyond any professional achievement. That moment of loneliness made him realize that Lúcia was the center of his happiness, and that nothing, not even the most tempting proposal in the world, could replace it. The next day, Alejandro decided he couldn't leave things as they were. He went to Lucia's apartment, but he heard from Clara that she was on the terrace of an old building where she used to go to reflect. Anxious, he ran there, willing to open his heart as never before. Upon arriving, he found Lucy alone, gazing at the view of the city, still with a sad countenance. He approached and, with a shrunken voice, apologized. Lucy, hurt, just listened in silence, waiting for him to explain his reasons. Alejandro then began one of the most profound and honest statements of his life. "Lúcia, I thought happiness was in great things, recognition, achievements. But you showed me that it is in the little things, in the moments we share and in the person you helped me become. I was about to lose what matters most to me, because I was blinded by the past, by an ambition that made no sense without you by my side." Lucy, still with her eyes swollen, turned to him and looked at him with suspicion. She said to him in a trembling voice, "Alejandro, how can I be sure that this is real? That you will not give in to the temptation of the world you have always cherished?" Alejandro knelt before her and promised that nothing else would be as important as their love. He told her about last night, how he realized that no success was worth it without her. And at that moment, he made a definitive decision. He would refuse the offer of work in the United States, renouncing external growth to build a solid future next to it. In the face of Alejandro's sincerity, Lúcia felt her own barriers fall. She finally understood that he was willing to sacrifice what before seemed indispensable to him. With tears running down her face, Lucy hugged him, feeling the warmth of his love and the truth in his words. This embrace was the culmination of all conflict, where both met, finally free from doubts and fears. After that moment, Alejandro and Lúcia decided to start a new phase of their lives together. They decided that they would build their story without the external pressures, without the need for approval of others, but based on their own happiness and the values they have discovered together. As a symbol of their renewed commitment, Alejandro suggested that they officialize their union. For him, this represented the overcoming of all obstacles and the commitment that, from then on, they would be side by side, without doubt and without regrets. Lucy, moved and convinced, accepted the request. After Alejandro's decision to stay in Madrid with Lúcia, their lives began to settle down at a new pace. Alejandro took a more balanced stance, both in professional and personal life, and his relationship with Lúcia was strengthened, marked by a true commitment and the mutual trust that they struggled to build. The choices and sacrifices they made along their journey led them to a point of deep understanding and genuine love. Alejandro's decision to turn down the expansion proposal for the United States had a significant impact on his career. Although some colleagues and investors have criticized his choice, claiming that he was wasting a unique opportunity, Alejandro was convinced of his decision. He realized that the internal growth of his company, focusing on innovation and quality, was more important than becoming a global corporation. This more careful and balanced approach earned the respect of many of the staff members and her sister, Clara, who recognized that Alejandro had finally found a purpose beyond ambition. Alejandro's personal life was also deeply affected. He became a more attentive man, able to give priority to what really mattered. Beside Lúcia, he experienced a life with meaning and found satisfaction in the little things, something that before seemed incomprehensible to him. This new lifestyle not only transformed Alejandro, but also influenced the company culture, where he began to encourage a more humane and less competitive work environment, reflecting what he had learned from working with Lúcia. For Lúcia, Alejandro's love and support brought a new confidence in herself. For the first time, she felt that she could be totally authentic, without fear of judgment or rejection. With the encouragement of Alejandro and Clara, Lúcia decided to return to her studies, specializing in management and innovation, with the aim of contributing even more to the company. In a short time, he became an important part of the development team, taking on a role that reflected his intelligence and determination. This growth was not overlooked by the team, which learned to value Lúcia for what she was and the talent that she demonstrated daily. Lúcia's transformation from an underrated figure to a respected professional inspired other employees to be more authentic and value their own skills. With the unconditional support of Alejandro and Clara, Lúcia flourished and established herself as a reference within the company, creating a positive impact that would last. Clara, always a fundamental support in the life of her brother, could not but be moved to see the growth and transformation of Alejandro. She recognized that Lúcia brought out the best in Alejandro, helping him to mature and become a more generous and sensitive person. Over time, Clara and Lúcia developed an even closer friendship, and Clara began to see Lúcia as a sister, someone she trusted and shared the challenges of the company and personal life. Alejandro's social circle, initially skeptical and even critical about the relationship, gradually began to accept and respect Lúcia. Although there were still those who saw the relationship with strangeness, most people around Alejandro began to see the happiness and peace he had found. This new cycle has brought more true friendships and deeper connections, based on respect and mutual support. To celebrate this new phase, Alejandro and Lúcia decided to organize a small wedding ceremony, gathering only close friends and family. The event, held in a winery on the outskirts of Madrid, was simple and intimate, reflecting what the couple really valued: authenticity and true love. Clara made an emotional speech, thanking Lúcia for being the pillar of transformation in the life of the brother and highlighting the strength that both demonstrated when facing the challenges. During the ceremony, Alejandro, moved, recalled all the way they had gone from the initial conflicts and apparent differences to the union that they had built. He declared himself to Lucy, saying that she was the person who taught him the true meaning of love and helped him rediscover himself. Lucy, with tears in her eyes, returned the words, thanking him for showing that love can overcome social and personal barriers, and for always believing in it. The ceremony marked the symbolic conclusion of all the adversities they faced and was a moment of liberation for both. Alejandro and Lúcia's love, forged by patience, forgiveness and understanding, became the foundation for the future they would build together. Alejandro, now more mature and conscious, knew that his life had a greater purpose next to Lúcia, and Lúcia, finally free of her insecurities, felt full and confident at his side. They returned to the routine with a renewed sense of purpose and happiness. Alejandro continued to lead the company with a more human and collaborative vision, while Lúcia played an important role in project development. Together, they cultivated a work environment that inspired others to be authentic and value what really mattered. 2 years later, the sun was setting in Madrid, tinging the sky of golden and pink tones, while Alejandro and Lúcia walked hand in hand through a park near the new neighborhood where they had chosen to live, away from the busy center and closer to a quiet life. They decided, after the wedding ceremony and all the life changes, that they wanted a home that represented this new chapter together, a place where they could build their memories with peace and purpose. The trees around them swayed softly, and the scent of spring flowers filled the air, bringing a lightness to the environment. The couple stopped for a moment in front of a small lake, where some children were playing. Alejandro bent down, picked up a pebble and threw it into the water, breaking the reflection of the sky in the waves that formed. "Do you remember how we were 2 years ago?" he asked, with a smile on his face and a touch of nostalgia. Lucy smiled, shaking his hand as she watched the circles in the water crumble. "Yes. I remember thinking you were impossible." She laughed softly. "But it was actually just complicated. And I was hiding too." Alejandro laughed. "And to think that it all started because you dared to be who you are. I don't think I've ever thanked enough for helping me figure out who I could be." He looked her in the eye, and at that moment there was a tenderness that reflected all the gratitude and respect they had built together. As they walked, the conversation flowed with a familiar tranquility. They talked about the growth they both experienced, about the company's team that had now gone through a redesign to value authenticity and teamwork, and how they were building their future. When they reached the park bench where they always liked to stop, Lúcia sat next to Alejandro, leaning on his shoulder. In the background, the laughter of children playing mixed with the singing of birds, creating a scene of harmony. Alejandro took Lucia's hand and, with a smile, asked a question that had been in his thoughts for a long time. "Have you ever thought about having a family? I mean, about expanding our family?" Lucy, surprised, turned to him with a gleam in her eyes. "I thought yes. And actually, I think this would be the perfect next chapter for us." She smiled, and Alejandro did not contain the emotion. He embraced her with strength, feeling that everything they had lived until there had been only the beginning of a story that would continue to grow. They stood there, in silence, dreaming together of what the future would hold for them. Those moments of peace represented the very essence of what they had built, a life where love, respect and authenticity were at the center of everything. As they returned home, Alejandro reflected aloud on what he had learned. "Life was a sequence of expectations and charges for me. But with you, I learned the value of what is simple and sincere." He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, as if he could taste every word. "You gave me a second chance, Lúcia. A chance to rediscover the true meaning of love." Lucy looked at him with affection, knowing that those words meant more than any promise. In a world full of pressures and illusions, they had found themselves. Not idealized but honestly, with all the flaws and challenges. And that was what made their love true. In the following months, Alejandro and Lúcia continued to live with fullness, learning together and supporting each other. They often returned to the park where they had made so many plans, always remembering how their lives had changed. The social and professional circle around them had also changed, and Alejandro and Lúcia were now an inspiration to all, known for their integrity and ability to lead with heart. Together, they represented the triumph of love over superficiality, proving that happiness is not in great external achievements, but in building something genuine and lasting alongside those we love. As they ended the day, watching the sunset in their new home, Alejandro and Lúcia embraced each other, ready for the next chapter, knowing that every challenge they faced had only made them stronger and more united. At that moment, they were at peace. Not because they had everything, but because they had each other. And so, Rediscovering True Love ends with a note of hope and fulfillment, reinforcing that true love is built and rediscovered day after day. True love is not in appearances or achievements, but in the courage to see and value the essence of those we love, even in the face of the greatest challenges. If you liked Rediscovering the True Love, don't forget to enjoy, comment and share. Your opinion is important to us and helps this story reach more people. Leave in the comments what moved you the most and share with those who you believe will be inspired too.